بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. وما تخلفت إفادة العلم عنه كان مشهورا فقط، فكل متواتر مشهور من غير عكس. وقد يقال إن الشروط الأربعة إذا حصلت استلزمت حصول العلم، وهو كذلك في الغالب، لكن قد يتخلف عن البعض لمانع. وقد وضح بهذا تعريف المتواتر. وخلافه قد يرد بلا حصر أيضا، لكن مع فقد بعض الشروط، أو مع حصر بما فوق الاثنين، أي بثلاثة فصاعدا ما لم تجتمع شروط التواتر، أو بهما أي باثنين فقط، أو بواحد. والمراد بقولنا أن يرد باثنين ألا يرد بأقل منهما، فإن ورد بأكثر في بعض المواضع من السند الواحد لا يضر، إذ الأقل في هذا يقضي على الأكثر، فالأول المتواتر. After mentioning the four conditions of a mutawatir narration, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah now stresses that a person must obtain conviction, certainty and full knowledge from the narration. If a person does not obtain full knowledge, then such a narration will not be considered as mutawatir. Rather, the narration will be mash'hūr. Hence, mash'hūr is a narration that resembles mutawatir, but a person still has reservations. A person does not get firm conviction. So he says, وَمَا تَخَلَّفَتْ إِفَادَةُ الْعِلْمِ عَنْهُ كَانَ مَشْهُورًا فَقَطْ. Whatever is short of giving the benefit of knowledge is mash'hūr only. So if a narration has the conditions of mutawatir, but a person still does not become convinced, he does not get full and absolute knowledge, then that narration will still be called mash'hūr. Now here Ibn Hajar rahimahullah said, كَانَ مَشْهُورًا فَقَطْ, that this narration will be mash'hūr. Allama Baqā'i rahimahullah, his student, commented on this and said, فَهُوَ الْمَشْهُورُ مَمْنُوعٌ بَلْ نَوْعٌ مِّنَ الْمَشْهُورِ, that it is incorrect to say that it is mash'hūr. Rather, it will be more accurate if you say بَلْ نَوْعٌ مِّنَ الْمَشْهُورِ, that it is a type of mash'hūr. A point to note here is that in the manuscripts of Qadā'ul Watr, and even in the print, this is attributed to Allama Qasim rahimahullah, but it is actually the statement of Allama Baqā'i rahimahullah. So you will understand why Allama Baqā'i rahimahullah is saying that it will be a type of mash'hūr as we go ahead with the text. فَكُلُّ مُتَوَاتِرٍ مَشْهُورٌ مِّنْ غَيْرِ عَكْسٍ. So every mutawatir is mash'hūr. Min ghayri aksin, without the opposite. That means not every mash'hūr is mutawatir. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah explained that every mutawatir is mash'hūr, but not every mash'hūr is mutawatir. This means that there is umum wa khusus between them. So we explained what is the meaning of umum wa khusus when we were discussing the relationship between the word hadith and the word khabar. I trust that you still remember, inshallah. It refers to one thing incorporating another, but not vice versa. The example is given of how every believer is a human being, but not every human being is a believer. Similarly, every mutawatir narration is a mash'hūr narration as well, but not every mash'hūr narration is a mutawatir narration. This is because every mutawatir narration needs to fulfill the four conditions. So a mutawatir narration fulfills those conditions, and by fulfilling those conditions, it automatically fulfills the conditions of a mash'hūr. The condition of a mash'hūr is that there should be a minimum of 3 or more in every link. And for mutawatir, we mentioned that it should be la yuhsar, it should be, it's not confined, but it's a lot. So here it shows that it fulfills the condition of having more than 3 in every link. But the only difference between mutawatir and mash'hūr is that the former gives concrete knowledge, whereas the latter leaves a person with a little of doubt. Hence, a mutawatir encompasses mash'hūr, but mash'hūr does not encompass mutawatir. Now here there is an objection that between mutawatir and mash'hūr there is tabayun, total differences. So there cannot be umum wa khusus between them. It cannot be that one is incorporating the other. Rather, they are two separate entities. They are both two separate things. But as the next chapter concerns mash'hūr, inshallah we will go through this chapter first, and then we will return to this objection. If I do not mention about this objection when we're doing the chapter of mash'hūr, then one of you can inshallah ask. So on this point, Allama Qasim rahimahullah highlighted that there is another difference too, and that is that mutawatir is not confined, whereas this is not the case with mash'hūr. So that's a difference between mutawatir and mash'hūr. Mutawatir has adamul hasr, and mash'hūr does not has adamul hasr. So he said, ولا بد وأن يزيد مما روي بلا حصر عدد معين وإلا لصدق المشهور على الجميع ومع هذا ينافيه قوله بعد هذا إن المشهور ما روي مع حصر. So you can see later on Ibn Hajar rahmallah is going to say that a mash'hūr narration, the number of narrators are confined. So therefore this here is a very big difference which ought to also be highlighted at this particular juncture. Since every mutawatir is mash'hūr according to what Ibn Hajar mentioned, some scholars before Ibn Hajar rahimahullah put mutawatir under the chapter of mash'hūr. For example, Allama Ibn Salah rahimahullah, he said, وَمِنَ الْمَشْهُورِ الْمُتَوَاتِرِ. So from mash'hūr, one type of mash'hūr is mutawatir. الذي يذكره أهل الفقه وأصوله وأهل الحديث لا يذكرونه باسم الخاص المشعر بمعناه الخاص. Amongst the Hanafis, Allama Dabusi rahimahullah also put mutawatir under mash'hūr. He said, الأخبار التي يعمل بها ضربان مشهور وغريب. فالمشهور ضربان ما بلغ حد التواتر وما اشتهر ولم يبلغ حد التواتر. So you can see he's mentioning that akhbar is divided into two types, mash'hūr and gharib. Thereafter he is dividing mash'hūr into two types. So the main differentiating factor between mutawatir and mash'hūr is that when a narration is mutawatir, then a person immediately obtains conviction, knowledge and full certainty. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah brings the words وَقَدْ يُقَال, which is a صيغة التمريض. So probably this is to show that there is weakness in what he is going to say. So he says وَقَدْ يُقال إن الشروط الأربعة إذا حصلت استلزمت حصول العلم وهو كذلك في الغالب وقد يتخلف عن البعض لمانع. So he's mentioning that it is said that when these four conditions are fulfilled, when the four conditions are there, then it necessitates the obtaining of knowledge. A person has to get knowledge. And what is said that they say that this here is only happens in most of the time, in most circumstances. لكن قد يتخلف عن البعض لمانع. But there could be those times that a person does not get knowledge. So in that case, basically they're saying that it is still mutawatir. So when the four conditions are found, then it is said that the natural outcome is that a person has to get firm conviction. But some are saying that no, this here is only most of the times. وَقَدْ يَتَخَلَّفُ عَنِ الْبَعْضِ لِمَانِعٍ. Sometimes they could be, you could have these rare circumstances where a person may still not get firm conviction. So which types of circumstances are these? Mullah Ali Qari rahimahullah gives the following example to illustrate this. He says, قِيلَ again وَتَصِيغَةُ التَّمْرِيض كَغَبَاوَةِ السَّامِعِ. So an impediment, an exception is like the mental incapacity of the listener. So basically the person is insane. To understand the level of stupidity and foolishness that he is referring to, if you refer to the last line on page 44 and the first line of page 45, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions there, لأن العلم بالتواتر حاصل لمن ليس له أهلية النظر كالعامة. So he's saying that a person who does not have the capacity, or he does not have the ability of differentiating between different things, like a layman, he does not understand all the technicalities, then he too will get knowledge what? A tawatur. So from this we understand that even if a person is not qualified, tawatur will be enough to convince him. However, it is only when a person is literally retarded and insane that he will not be convinced what? Tawatur. Thus, the objection is raised that we do not give consideration to such a person in the first place. Isn't Rufi'at al-Aqlam? He has no intellect at all, and hence he is in the same category as an animal. Mullah al-Qari rahmallah said, وَفِيهِ أَنَّهُ لَا عِبَرَةَ بِهِ لِأَنَّهُ بِمَنْزِلَةِ الْحَيْوَانِ. That concerning him there is no consideration of him because he is on the same status as an animal. He is not even mukallaf with the ahkam of sharia. When a person studies mantiq, then you learn about jins and fasl, and that is very similar to umum and khusus that we spoke about earlier. So the differentiating factor between a human being and an animal is intellect. The crux is that if a person has such an intellectual deficiency and a person is insane, then such a person is regarded abnormal, and the reason why he fails to obtain knowledge is because of this ability of his. Allama Isa ibn Aban rahimahullah said, إذ لا فرق في عقول الناس جميع كاملهم وناقصهم وذكيهم وغبيهم. You can see he's mentioning the word غبيهم. بينما علموه وتقرر في عقولهم أنه قد كان في الدنيا ناس قبلنا. That irrespective of the different in intellect, different people have different intellect and amount of knowledge that people have based on their intelligence and their foolishness, everyone will agree that there were people who lived before us. وأن السماء قد كانت موجودة قبل ولادتنا. And the sky was there before we were even born. وأنه قد كان لنا أجداد وملوك قبل وجودنا. Before we were born, there were many kings and our predecessors, our forefathers, and there were many people who loved. ولا سبيل إلى العلم بذلك من طريق الخبر. So here you can see he used the word غبي, and Mullah al-Qari rahmallah used the derivative which is غباوة. So these examples that Allama Isa ibn Aban rahmallah gives for tawatur, they clearly illustrate the extent of the insanity that a person has to have in order to reject these narrations. Because look at these examples that he's saying, أنه قد كان في الدنيا ناس قبلنا. There surely were people in this world before us. وأن السماء قد كانت موجودة قبل ولادتنا. So any person with standard intellect, or even slightly weak intellect, he will not have any doubt concerning any of these things. A person can live and grow up in a rural area with no resources or no access to knowledge, but he will still have firm belief that the sky existed before he was born. Any illiterate person even believes in all of these. A person does not need to go to school to understand that humans existed before us. So this here clarifies that a person has to actually be insane and mentally ill. Now if a person is of this level of insanity, then is there really a reason for making an exception? You know, an exception weakens the principle. The more exceptions, the weaker the principle. So you only make exceptions when it is absolutely necessary. You can understand this, now in COVID we had lockdowns. So first there was a full lockdown. No one could emerge from their homes unless there was really a valid excuse. So there were no exceptions. Then some exceptions were made, such that a person may leave his house for business or work. So these exceptions, that leaving the house for business and work, made the principle weaker. Now you will have people who are leaving their houses more often. Then even more exceptions were introduced, and so people had more room and excuses to violate the law. As the list of exceptions increased, the principle became weaker to the extent that a lockdown exists just in name, but it is actually non-existent. A person may be walking on the road, someone can ask him, where are you going? And he can say that he's going to work. So you can see. So there is a lot of emphasis being placed on the knowledge that a person should obtain from a tawatur report. You will see on the next page, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah again emphasizes that a person will get absolute conviction. So if this is the case, why then should he weaken the principle with an exception concerning a person who is not even mukallaf? He is not obliged by the laws of Sharia. There is no need to create an exception. Mullah al-Qari rahmallah then gives another example, awil asam, or a deaf person. So he makes the exception of a deaf person, that a deaf person will not get firm knowledge and full conviction with tawatur. But this is also out of place. Talking to a deaf person is similar to talking to a wall or to a person who does not know the language in which the communication is taking place. So now to understand this here, for example, say if 10 Ḥadīth students, they were to go to the leading university and they go to the most advanced and knowledgeable PhD professor who teaches French, so he knows French. Then if those 10 students, they have to quote to him narrations in Arabic, then the professor will not obtain any knowledge from the 10 students, isn't? Although he's so qualified and he's teaching such academics, but he will not obtain any knowledge in spite of his qualifications. So a deaf person is the same. A deaf person or a French professor will only understand the communication if it is made in their respective languages. So that is for a deaf person. If you talk to him in sign language, then he will understand what you are saying. Likewise, a professor, or not even a professor, just an average French person, if you talk to him in French, he will understand. So now you cannot look down upon such individuals because they do not understand the narration, because the fault is with the one who is communicating. The fault was with those 10 students, that how could they go and discuss with someone who does not understand their language. So this here again, it's out of place. If you tell the deaf person in his language, and it reaches him through tawatur, then he will understand. Talk to him in his language, he'll understand. Talk to him in any other language, because he cannot hear, then he's not going to understand. Some then gave the example of very small children, kasibyan. To accept this exception, such children would have to be really young to not understand. You know, the children who are aged 6 and 7, they definitely will understand and obtain knowledge. And this is the reason why we are able to send them to school at such a young age. The only way these young children will obtain knowledge is if they are willing to trust the teacher. But if they have trust issues, and then they cannot even be sent to school. They must just be left at home and left to play. So the truth is that when a person has to look through the books of usul al-fiqh and mantiq, then he will notice that there are no exclusions, there are no exceptions. Now bear in mind that muhaddithin took the concept of tawatur from the scholars of usul al-fiqh. And the scholars of usul al-fiqh, they took it from philosophers and scholars of ilm al-kalam. This is the reason we find tawatur mentioned in mantiq books. To give one random example, in Risala Shamsiyya it is said, أما الخاتمة ففيها مبحثان الأول في مبادئ الأقيسة وهي يقينيات وغير يقينيات أما اليقينيات فستة. So he's mentioning that there are six things which gives firm yaqeen, and from amongst the six things they mention mutawatir. So in short, there is no valid reason or excuse why a person should not obtain knowledge when the four conditions of tawatur are found. There is really no need to make exceptions for lunatics and babies. Allama al-Laqani rahimahullah, he tried to explain it differently. He said, وَمِنَ الْمَانِعِ عَدَمُ عِلْمِ النَّاظِرِ فِيهِ بِتِلْكَ الشُّرُوطِ. The exceptions are that a person is unaware that the conditions of tawatur are fulfilled. So it means that probably a person did not know, for example, that such a huge group of people are narrating that incident. So this again, now it's out of place. There's no need for this exception because the narration is not tawatur for that person. Once it does become tawatur for him, then he will get firm knowledge. So there is no valid excuse, and perhaps this is the reason why Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned it with a sighatut tamrid. He said, وَقَدْ يُقَال. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah now explains the other categories after mutawatir. He first presents a brief overview and later on he will explain each category properly. So he says, وَخِلَافُهُ قد يرد بلا حصر أيضا لكن مع فقد بعض الشروط. The opposite of mutawatir is found also without specification. However, some of the conditions are missing. So here Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah is mentioning the opposite of mutawatir. Now first he mentioned a mutawatir, and the outcome of such a narration was that a person would obtain absolute knowledge. Then we have narrations which are also transmitted from a really large group, but some conditions are missing. For example, we may have multiple people telling us something, but we feel that they all have a common interest, and therefore maybe they colluded on this lie, and therefore despite this large number, we have reservations. So this is just one scenario. Now the category that he is speaking about here is Mash'hūr, but he did not mention the name is Mash'hūr. So therefore Allama Qasim rahimahullah said, يُقَالُ عَلَيْهِ فَمَاذَا يُسَمَّى. It will be asked, now you are mentioning this here, what is it called? So this here is called Mash'hūr. Now remember what we just mentioned in the beginning of this lesson. It seemed as if mutawatir and mashhur are the same, and the only difference is that a person does not become fully convinced with mashhur. But now he is saying مع فقد بعض الشروط, with some conditions missing. So from this it is understood that the narration could be mashhur due to various reasons. At times it could be because all the conditions of mutawatir are found, but the person just have doubt. At other times integral and essential conditions of tawatur could be lacking, and that is the reason why Allama Baqai rahmallah mentioned earlier that Ibn Hajar should have said that is a type of mashhur. Mutawatir is a type of mashhur. He shouldn't make it that mutawatir is mashhur. The second scenario is أو مع حصر بما فوق الاثنين أي بثلاثة فصاعدا ما لم تجتمع شروط التواتر, or maybe the number is specified with a number more than 2, but there are some other conditions which may not be fulfilled. So maybe there are 3 narrators in a particular link, or 4 or 5 in a particular era, but another condition is not found. So like we said, we will discuss all of this here when we come to the dedicated chapters. Then he says, أو بهما أي باثنين فقط. That maybe there are just two narrators in a particular link. Such a narration will be called Aziz. أو بواحد. Or maybe there is only one narrator in a particular link. Such a narration will be called Gharib. In another chapter about it will be coming in front. So the author now explains a principle and he says, وَالْمُرَادُ بِقَوْلِنَا أَن يَرِدَ بِاثْنَيْنِ أَلَّا يَرِدَ بِأَقَلَّ مِنْهُمَا. That when we say that it should be transmitted by two people, then the meaning is that it should not be transmitted by less than two. فإن ورد بأكثر في بعض المواضع من السند الواحد لا يضر. If there are more narrators found in any particular link in the chain, then لا يضر, there is no harm. So when he is saying that it should be for a narration to be Aziz, there should be two narrators, then this refers to the minimum in one link. It does not mean that the narration cannot have more than two narrators in the other links. Rather, it is better to have more narrators. However, because there are only two narrators in that one link, therefore we will be terming that narration as Aziz. So he says, إِذِ الْأَقَلُّ فِي هَذَا يَقْضِي عَلَى الْأَكْثَرِ. The minimum is considered over the maximum. To identify the correct terminology to use to grade the narration, a person must always look at the lowest number and at the weakest link. So you can have hundreds of narrators in other links, but if in one particular link there are only two narrators, then the narration will be considered as Aziz. Even though in the other links there are hundreds and even thousands of narrators. Likewise, you can have the greatest Imams and the most erudite narrators in other links of the Sanads, but if only at one place there is a weak narrator, then the entire sanad will be regarded as weak. فَالْأَوَّلُ الْمُتَوَاتِرُ. So he explains that the first is mutawatir. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah now elaborates on the type of knowledge which a person gets from a mutawatir narration, and thereafter he will explain with regards to these other types which he mentions, that is with regards to Mash'hūr, Aziz and Gharib. So we're going back now to the discussion of mutawatir, and thereafter we will discuss these other terminologies. And like I said, that when we discuss, when we come to those relevant chapters, then inshallah we will discuss them in detail there. So inshallah we will pause the lesson here. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.